There was a portrait a couple years back by Kat Leedon, and it was a photographic portrait of them post double mastectomy. They were sitting in bed. It was a really dark portrait. They'd been crying. They had the scars. And I thought it was stunning from the moment I saw it. And in the comments, really, really enjoyed Del Catherine Barton's portrait of Maggie Beer. A, because everybody thinks it's actually Quentin Bryce and not Maggie Beer. B, because Maggie Beer loves it. And C, everybody else kind of hates it.
Today's guest, Georgie, a brilliant content creator and natural storyteller. We explore her lived experiences, lessons learned from managing high engagement social accounts, and how she balances creativity with a deep respect for our national institutions.
What they did was Governor Lachlan Macquarie, he wrote to Britain and he asked for some coins. Britain replied and said that they had a silver shortage, so they couldn't send us any of their coins.
Typical Brits, they don't want to help.
Yeah, right? They don't want to help. They basically said, we're closing the mint. We can send you on a secondment to Services Australia. And as someone who is mildly performative, I'm like Tinkerbell, I need applause to exist.
Georgie, thank you so much for making time to chat. Thank you for always being bubbly, vibrant, happy. If I can ask you, what's the one Australian story that people should know about that most people don't know about?
So my favourite Australian story I learned when I was working at the Mint. Australian coin history is really strange in that there really wasn't any for the first 10 or 20 years of the colony, of the New South Wales colony, because they were not prepared. They were like, this is a prison. It's not supposed to be anything else. There isn't supposed to be any trade. So the story of the Holey dollar is my favourite Australian story that I think everybody should know. And I think it kind of sets the scene of like white settler history in Australia in particular. So the story of the Holey dollar goes that they didn't have enough money in the colony. They were doing all sorts of bartering and trading. They were using anything that came in on the ships. They were using anything that came in their pockets, all the soldiers and sailors. If they had a couple of coins from back home, that's what they used to trade. They got to a point where they were making some weird moonshine concoction that they called rum, and they were using that to barter. So there are stories of men who would sell their wives for rum. Love that. So
anything for a drink.
You do what you got to do, right? So what they did was Governor Lachlan Macquarie, he wrote to Britain and he asked for some coins. Britain replied and said that they had a silver shortage, so they couldn't send us any of their coins.
Typical Brits, they don't want to help.
Yeah, right? They don't want to help. But they could buy us 40,000 Spanish dollars. So actually it's 20,000 Spanish dollars. And Spain was very good at producing coins. What they did when they colonised South America was instead of massacring people, they basically enslaved them all and put them into mints. So they had a ton of money coming out. We got our 20,000 Spanish dollars, and Macquarie was like, okay, well, I have a couple of problems to solve. Number one, I want to make sure that these coins look so unique that the ships that come in from wherever to trade don't want our coins, they just want our goods. And number two, he wanted to get double the amount. He wanted a big coin and a little coin that they could use as change. So he was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm not like a money maker. So he looked through his list of convicts and he came across a man by the name of William Henschel. Now, William Henschel had been sentenced to 7 years transportation for the crime of coin forgery. And he went, that's my guy.
Core skills.
Exactly. So he put him in a random factory in Sydney, and this guy took the Spanish dollars, punched a hole through the middle, and made Here's my prop that I prepared earlier.
Right.
Here is my Spanish dollar. This is your Holey dollar. So it's got a hole in it, right? And the little piece that came out the middle, that's called the dump, because it was dumped out. These coins were eventually sent back to Britain to be melted down for their silver when they all kind of worked out that they actually needed a mint. So there aren't that many of them left. There are only about 200 left in existence that we know about. They turn up in the weirdest places. One was found inside the engine of a tractor being used as a washer. One's been found inside a Hills Hoist washing line. But the one that's tattooed on me, which I've never seen in person but would love to, that's called the Hannibal Head Holy Dollar. So they had a whole mixture of different monarchs and years on the actual Spanish dollars. And this one was Napoleon's brother, who was King of Spain for whatever reason, and the colonies hated him, so they didn't use the official effigy that they gave them for the coin. Instead, they made this like really, really ugly effigy, stamped it on the coin, and the mixture of that ugly, what they call the Hannibal Head effigy, and the date means that coin is worth $550,000.
Wow.
And that's my favourite story. Because it's just weird. Like, it's so out of pocket that we were, like, so reliant on people for so long when we had a whole group of people who'd been living here for 60,000+ years, who knew the land, who knew what to do, who got along with bartering. They were even bartering internationally. And instead of actually, learning from our First Nations people, all the colonial business that happened was just harder than it needed to be, didn't make sense, and ended up with these artifacts that we value a lot more than we value First Nations history. And that makes it sound weird that I then got a tattoo of it.
But is it lack of perspective or lack of understanding?
So. And I think the reason I love it is because it just really explains why the first 10, 20, 50 years of colonization here was just like this weird mess. And, you keep getting through it and you get to the 1850s and they find gold, and that's a whole other mess, And I think in Australia, we don't really touch on that mess, I guess. We talk about, successes. We talk about the pastoralists and all of their really big success with all these different kinds of sheep. We talk about Farlap and, how great he is. We're a big sporting nation, so we'll talk about all our huge sporting success. But it's very rarely that you come across something that kind of makes us seem fallible. Mm-hmm. And sort of brings that humanity into the people who were sent here. And they weren't sent here to colonize. They were sent here to serve a prison sentence. And I don't know, it's just something about all of that I think that the Holy Dollar reminds me of. It's very human. And also it's worth a lot of money, so it makes my little heart go, woo!
Speaking about perspective, as a young child, I visited many galleries and museums. I just don't know that I was set up for success. If a young person is visiting a gallery or a museum, or somebody is new to a country and they're visiting a museum, what are those things that they need to know before visiting the museum? What are those things they need to keep an eye out for while visiting a gallery or a museum?
That's a very good question. I think, first of all, it's not up to the visitor to know how to visit a gallery. It's up to the gallery or museum to actually be set up in a way that is accessible and engaging for a young person, for someone who's visiting from overseas, from someone who's like never had the chance to go to a gallery or a museum before. Like, it's the institution's job to do that. I think, though, what I do before I visit things is I go to places where I know something is. So say, you know, I am going to, I don't know, like the British Museum, because I want to see one of the Easter Island heads. You know, I know it's there, I'm going to go, but I think you need to be open-minded as well about finding other things. And I think that's the thing with visiting as a child. It's kind of, you know, nowadays we have such access to museums and collections and galleries and stuff. Everybody is an iPad kid. They know how to Google, or even parents kind of facilitating that sort of find that thing that interests them in that museum and sort of facilitate getting there. That's why I think like family trails or kids trails, like I take a family trail or kids trail when I visit museums, because it's things that should be engaging. And, you know, I will walk through a museum. I'm actually really bad at going to museums. I don't read the labels unless like I'm really interested in the topic. But I will go to a museum and I'll find the things that engage me. If there's some Renaissance painting that I've seen online 65,000 times and that has never really like struck me, that kind of thing, I'll maybe go have a look at, be all like, there are too many people here. I don't want to hang out in front of this thing. So I'll go find something else that engages me. Or if there's something that I know of and that I want to see in person, like I've seen a couple of Van Goghs in person and I stood in front of them, and I love Van Gogh. So I was just like looking at the texture and looking at the paint strokes and finding his little signature. But that's because I'm interested in that. It's kind of like going to a zoo. Mm-hmm. If you really like penguins, you're going to go find the penguins at the zoo. And if you happen to find something else along the way that you also like, great. But it's kind of having that aim, I think, is how people should maybe approach museums. When I was a kid, we would just wander aimlessly through castles, through museums, through all these different places. And it wouldn't be interesting. But I remember, I think zoos and aquariums, because you have that favourite animal or you have that favourite fish, shark, whatever, there's a goal. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good way of going through museums and seeing it as like active participation rather than a passive experience where all this information is thrown at you and you feel obligated because that like it's part of the cultural zeitgeist and you need to see the Mona Lisa. But also if the Mona Lisa isn't speaking to you, you don't have to stand there and wait to get through 10 people to go see the Mona Lisa.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. You spoke about the digital age and children being on iPads. But let me take you back way back when.
Yeah.
Way back when we had the pandemic and all galleries, museums, all of them went, all right, how do we do engagement now? Sitting in Canberra, I was fortunate to see this blossoming content creator at the Mint doing a full series of wonderful stuff. Tell me the thought process of how did that come about? How did you become the talent? And what was the feedback?
So, at the start of the pandemic, working at the Mint, I was a casual at the time. They basically said, we're closing the Mint, but we can send you on a secondment to Services Australia. And as someone who is mildly performative. I'm like Tinkerbell. I need applause to exist. So even though
I'm happy to clap all the time.
Thank you so much. Even though like I'm a massive introvert as well, I do like, telling people things. I like helping people learn. And it got to a point at Services Australia where I emailed the Mint people and I was like, I can't do this anymore. You either need to bring me back or I'm going to go on leave and who knows when you'll see me again, because I just couldn't do it. It was depressing. I knew it was really valuable work, but also we don't need to talk about Services Australia during COVID. Not great. So they brought me back. They knew I'd been to film school, so I had that sort of content creation background. I think I was the tour guide who'd been there the longest as well. And I had my little script, I had my little stories put together. I am great with kids. And they thought, you know what, maybe we should take the school tour and actually divide it into little chunks so that people can just watch it online. And for people who don't come to the Mint in person, who are kids on their year 6 who've had their year 6 trips cancelled, if they can still get that sort of engaging, exciting experience through the web, then that's the way we're going to do it. And so I got to put on hats. I got to put on a really bogan accent and pretend I was mining gold. I got to hold a Holey dollar, which was very exciting for me. And I got to tell these stories with props that I wouldn't usually get, and with the ability to kind of backtrack as well. And the editing, very helpful, because it means if I trip over my words, it's fine. But it kind of came to be because I did have that. Each of my tours at the Mint was kind of a performance. It was like doing a 4-year run of Hamlet, except it was an hour-long school tour about coins. So it was a way for us to kind of show more behind-the-scenes stuff, get people closer to things, because A, we can't take children down to the factory floor. B, couldn't get the objects out, all of that sort of stuff. It was a real opportunity to showcase the museum in a way that isn't possible with a ton of people around. We also had to do a virtual week in Canberra excursion. So when all the schools weren't allowed to come anymore, the Department of Education in New South Wales decided they were going to do a virtual school trip. So all of the cultural institutions had to do an online presentation. I think ours was on day 2. We had 12,000 connections, and my apartment Wi-Fi could not cope. So I had to do the whole thing with my camera off, with children in the chat being weird, and with just no green screen, no nothing. So it was, I think, the beginning of COVID. It seems like a decade ago now, because so much has changed and so much has become kind of BAU by now. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we didn't do that sort of stuff before is very strange to me. We didn't think to be all we have this ability, we should actually use it. But
technology's come a long way.
It
also,
really
right?
has.
The ability for us to video conference is better now. I think it's streaming has been stripped down a little more. We've got a little more creative backgrounds that aren't all fuzzy, so we can film from wherever it is. But you spoke about kids being weird in the chat, kids just being kids, right? What was that one story, if you can still remember, from the Mint that you shared during that pandemic that got that was most spoken about, or that got the most likes or the most reactions or the most dislikes?
I think the factory floor, showing people the process in a way that was intuitive in that they could follow it rather than standing in front of a window looking down and having someone point to where things are. Being able to explain it while cutting to videos of that process and taking our time, I think that was really special for people, and they really enjoyed that kind of closer look that they wouldn't necessarily get on the on-site visitor experience. I think the thing that came out of the pandemic that made me happiest, like the video content, was I got a call when I was working in the office in a different role, so I wasn't out on the floor all the time. But I got a call saying that a kid was there and he wanted to see the lady who was in the YouTube videos. And
I walk into the Mint all the time. I want to see the lady in the YouTube videos.
Yeah, he wanted to come in and he wanted to meet me because he'd watched all the videos. And so I got to go out and meet this kid, and he was telling me, he was like, "Oh, Georgie." And I was like, "Oh my God, child I've never met in my life." I felt like Miss Rachel or like Bluey. I felt very important. It was very exciting. And this kid was just like elated that I was actually real. And I walked him through the gallery and I left him to look at Titan at the end, ran downstairs, found all this merch that I could give this child and signed a piggy bank for him. And it was like my little moment of fame that I think just made such a difference, because, you know, you can get likes and stuff, but you think about it, and the way I like things is I look at it for a second and then I'll like it. So I'm like, you know, people probably aren't actually watching my stuff, and having that one person be like, "Oh, I've seen your stuff. I really like it. I wanted to come and see you." Like, that just was such a nice feeling, and it really validated that really hard work that we put into making that digital experience feel like something worthwhile. And I think that was kind of what has spurred on the rest of my content creation and all of that work that I put into the digital space, knowing that even though, like, in the back of my head, the little voice is going, no one's actually looking at that. There might be just one person, and if they learn something new, great. Because I think that's what it is to me. It's all about education, and it's all about making sure that people who would not otherwise get to know these things have a way to obtain that knowledge if they want to.
And I think that's the creative person paradigm shift, right? We don't need the metrics always to do what we love doing. And that's where I want to go next, is to speak to you about job design. Not always in your job role do you have to create content, be the front face, be the celebrity, collect the merch. But all of those experiences inspire you to be who you are. Tell me a little bit about that journey, because it couldn't have been easy. Couldn't have been as simple as, I'm going to get a camera, get a script and do this. Because you also would have built your skills through that process. Your skills of engaging with an audience online. Your skills of, okay, if my internet in my apartment can't manage this, how do I use voice, use gestures, use props, use cutaway to create more engagement? What are some of those tips that you learned about online engagement that you think will be really useful for somebody else to know also?
I mean, I think the 12 years of high school or like school theatre helped, and sort of having a personality that's quite... I've been told that my humour's quite dry by school teachers and blunt.
Perspective.
Yeah, but the kids like really respond to it, and it's sort of creating that persona that can present content in a way that is sometimes self-deprecating, and it's sometimes like it's playful. So I think the creation of that persona and then kind of molding it to fit an online environment was something that was really helpful, like having that person that couldn't be thrown off by technical difficulties. Like, there was just, she can't do that. She's live. There are 12,000 children listening to her. She just has to get on with it. I think as well, having a really supportive creative team around you is important. And they may not be, you might be a one-person show. You might be sound, camera, in front of the camera. You might be doing all of that yourself. But having people who you know that you can send draft scripts to, that can look at edits and be all like, that's weird. Or who, my mum will still like give me hot tips on how to boost social engagement. And I'm like, Mum, I love you, but you have no idea what you're talking about. But she is so willing to just be all like, what if you just got the Prime Minister to endorse the Instagram? And I'm like,
love your train of thought, Mum.
I love this. I don't think he has the time. He doesn't even follow us. So, this is with the new job. But it was things like that. And I was like, I think as well, it's like having to be the face of an institution is a bit funny as well. And being, even if you're not the face, like being the voice of an institution and working out what that voice is and what it can and can't say. So while working at the Portrait Gallery, it was much more playful than at the Mint. But there was still, you had to toe the line. It's still a government institution, still funded by the government. My time at the Portrait Gallery, a couple months after I started, that's when Tony Burke gave all the institutions that huge influx of money. And so, that year we didn't ask for money for the annual appeal. It just slowly disseminated out into the people that we wanted to give us money. Like, there's that kind of understanding your environment and having a team that understands it better than you. That's what I think is really, especially my role at the Portrait Gallery, because I was in the marketing team, understanding that I could rely on other people to know broader things and to say yes or no, rather than doing something full force, being all like, woo, and then having people not respond well online once it's already been shared. I think it's just that having people that you can bounce ideas off, that you can send things to, and that they'll be honest with you, but having that group of people be quite broad as well. So they're people not exactly like you who are like, yeah, I'll do whatever you're doing. They're people like my mum who are like, I don't quite get this, but I'm enthusiastic and I'm going to tell you how to do your job. So, she still looks at my essays, if I do essays, and tells me I have too many commas. Like, things like that. I don't know. You need to be humbled, I think, is a big thing when you're, being boisterous and out there. It does pay well to be humbled by someone.
So zooming into your time at the National Portrait Gallery, what is your favorite piece of Australian art or pieces of Australian art?
So my favourite, I've got two favourite portraits. One is a satirical portrait of Sir Joseph Banks, colonial botanist, as a butterfly. But there are two little grubs, like, crawling along on the floor towards his butterfly. And it's all about how, like, colonial England still thought he was a grub and that he was, just going off doing it. Anyway, so there's that one, which has a whole huge colonial history behind it, but we've done the Holy Dollar. We don't need to go into that. My other favourite is this it's quite small portrait that is of and by Peter Russell-Clarke, who was this big TV chef, like pre-Jamie Oliver, pre all of those guys. He was always very sort of cheeky, kind of uncouth. He'd make all these different jokes. And I had no idea who this man was when I started at the portrait gallery, but I came across the portrait as part of the collection search. So they've got like 95% of their collection digitized, which is very different to almost every single other cultural institution. Their collection's very small though, so they kind of can do that. But his portrait he looks like a Muppet. He has his little chef's hat on, his hair's all spiky, he's got a huge red nose, a huge mustache, a funny little smile, and then he's wearing his little chef's outfit, but he looks like he's got the Elmo nose, you know, like he looks like a Muppet. And it just brought me so much joy that something like that could be in the collection of a national cultural institution. And it's kind of like on the line of whether or not he was taking the piss. But I still think things like that, it's really special when something kind of verging on satire kind of makes it into somewhere special. It's like any sort of subversion of the sort of prim, proper, white-walled Renaissance painting gallery just brings me so much joy. So I also really, really enjoy Del Catherine Barton's portrait of Maggie Beer. A, because everybody thinks it's actually Quentin Bryce and not Maggie Beer. B, because Maggie Beer loves it. And C, everybody else kind of hates it because it's about her as a person. It's not a striking, like, mirror image of her. And I think when, especially with portraiture, when that kind of disconnect between the artist and the subject and then the audience happens, I think that's really interesting because it says more about what the audience expects of the institution than it says about like artistic merit or anything like that. So yeah, I think the Peter Russell-Clarke, the Joseph Banks, and the Maggie Beer are very special and hold a very special place in my heart. Yeah.
And it's interesting that all of those portraits have very unique storytelling points of view for different audiences that walk in, right? And that's the ability to engage. I'm also keen to understand what role does First Nation storytelling have to play in portraiture? What have you seen, but what would you like to see?
Well, first off, I have no First Nations background. I grew up not in Australia as well, so my understanding of First Nations art, First Nations culture and storytelling and history all comes from the age of 16 onwards. So I wasn't taught about the colonial stuff. I wasn't taught about any of that until I came back here at 16. And by then I'd already kind of developed my like angry feminist, you know, values that were very intersectional and that, you know, I always wanted to take a back foot when it came to topics and ideas such as, you know, First Nations portraiture. That said, the portrait gallery, I think recently has been taking some really important steps towards kind of exploring what portraiture is from a First Nations perspective. So one of the most famous works in the portrait gallery collection is a Archibald portrait of Deborah Mailman. It's on like these jute sacks and she looks stunning. And everybody who comes to the gallery wants to see the portrait of Deb. They will walk in and they'll be all like, okay, where's Deb? And if she's not on display, they get really cranky because like that is their concept of the entire gallery. And it was really interesting because she's usually in gallery 1 or 2, so she's one of the first couple of things that you see. But last year, around the time of the Venice Biennale, Archie Moore, one of his works, was acquired by the Portrait Gallery and popped in Gallery 1, so it was the first thing that you could see. What it was he'd gotten a pigment scanner and he'd found different shades of his skin from different parts of his body. There was stuff like the head of his penis, but there was like his right leg, his left leg, and he put them all on pieces of board that kind of correlated, the shape and size of which kind of correlated to where it was. And it was a portrait. It was a portrait very obviously, I think, to everybody who worked at the Portrait Gallery, because it was of him, it was his story, and he was saying something with his practice that was, it fit into his broader practice about, you know, history, his culture, his relationship to his body, his country, all of that sort of stuff. And the visitors hated it because they walked in wanting to see a photorealistic portrait of a First Nations person. They didn't want to walk in and be confronted with skin colour. And I think it is so interesting the way that people reacted to that, because you could kind of tell that their conception of portraiture was not contemporary. It was, I go to the Archibald Prize every year, I look at 80 paintings, mostly of white people, and half of them are famous, and then that's what they think a portrait is. Whereas I think a lot of the time, First Nations people in particular, their portrait isn't just a body and a plate and a face, right? There was a portrait in the Archie 100 exhibition at the Portrait Gallery, and I cannot remember the artist's name, but I will find it for you. But it was a really stunning, huge portrait with all these beautiful, like, warm-coloured hues. It was like a dot painting. Didn't have a face on it. And people would walk out of the Archie 100 exhibition and be all like, I loved everything except that, because it wasn't a portrait. And this is their conception, being that portraiture is watching the Archibald. But even though this thing was in the Archibald, they still couldn't kind of make that fit into their definition of portraiture. And I think sort of my love for the subversion of the genre is, it's sort of, it does include the way that First Nations people deal with portraiture and deal with art, and the way that they look in spaces, their work looks in spaces against that kind of very Western concept of art. And so, like, when I go to, you know, I grew up in Asia, I grew up in Thailand, and you go to temples, and the art in temples is stunning. And I didn't necessarily kind of have that understanding that people would put art in boxes, I guess, because I wasn't going to your typical gallery space growing up. And I don't know, I think it's really important that First Nations art is kind of being recognised on an international scale. Archimore won the Venice Biennale this year. Who even knows what's going to happen with, well, next Venice Biennale, who even knows what's going to happen with that? That whole situation is horrific. But I think just the way that, you know, First Nations people, even the curatorial practice of First Nations curators is so interesting because it's very, like, artist-led, it's very community-focused, it's very, like, giving. And the portrait gallery was without a First Nations curator for a long while. And you could really kind of feel that. And you could as well feel the cultural load that First Nations curator had before they left, because they were the go-to for everything. And, you know, you work in the arts, and a lot of people in the arts are very progressive, and they want to make sure that they're doing everything properly and that they are doing everything that they can to make sure there's that First Nations representation. But there's, like, one person in their entire organisation that is First Nations, and, like, I'm finding it difficult in my current role. In my department, there is no First Nations person. So, like, you feel bad about the cultural load, but you're like, you also want to, you know, I really want to facilitate a space, especially online, to show how important First Nations people and culture are to our society and culture. And, you know, social media is not the best space for that because people are feral. But that doesn't, I'm passionate about it, and I will do anything to make sure that, you know, First Nations people are kind of shown in what is predominantly and historically a very white kind of institution and area.
Yeah. And it's really interesting to see that some of the experiences you just outlined at the portrait gallery also is consistent with some of the experiences in broader society. It's the lens we look at things from. It's sometimes the preconceived notions that we're bringing in, versus if we just take a split second to open our mind to art, culture, values, maybe something we can learn about that culture, their food, their well-being, medicinal practices. There's so much we can learn from. Springboarding from there, I'm very keen to understand in terms of when you have a collection in the portrait gallery or a gallery, and when you are the social media manager for that. There are pieces that resonate with most of your audiences, there are the others. What's the role in how you respond to some of them? What's the role in how you bring attention to some of them? What's the role in where you just sit back and enjoy?
Look, being a social media manager for a cultural institution is just, it's a lot. You are you know, a lot of people talk about how front of house kind of has to deal with all these people, and 2 or 3 times a day there'll be someone not great who comes in and makes a fuss and all of that. But there were days working at the portrait gallery where we would get hundreds of comments that were very unhappy, that were occasionally quite vile, and that would kind of make us think, oh, maybe we shouldn't actually be posting that sort of portrait. But when I say that, it's like a photograph of a First Nations woman, and it's just happened to end up on the wrong side of the internet. I think a lot of the time it's this kind of internal battle between wanting to shield and protect and wanting to actually advocate. So I think in some instances there are kind of safe ways to showcase that work. Putting it in a reel with multiple works, you still get the work out there, but it's not the first thing you see in the first 3 seconds, as awful as that sounds. Like, there are ways around getting all that negative attention, because the negative attention is bad for brand reputation, right? So it's that really fine line between your personal morals and beliefs and then like understanding that you work for the government and that you work for an institution that has spent a very long time building up a particular reputation. During the Voice referendum in 2023, it was the photograph of a First Nations woman, and I think somehow it had been shared on Facebook to like a Vote No page, and we got something like 150 comments overnight on a Saturday. So there was me working on a Saturday, and from that point on, we only scheduled potentially controversial things during the week.
Good plan. Good plan.
But it's sad that we have to do that. And that was, I think that was the first instance of it not just being frontline staff actually having to deal with it. It kind of went up the line and everybody was told that this is what was happening. So it was kind of the first time that, all these like really passionate arts people were like, oh, there are repercussions to our choices. Even though, those repercussions should not happen, should not be a thing. Like, I don't know, it's so strange being the singular person that talks to like 170,000 people a day. Like, I don't know how influencers do it. I don't know how they talk to millions of people. It's terrifying. And I understand why they all turn off their comments. But I think as an institution, a lot of the time, it's our job to kind of defend that. And there are instances where, you share a portrait. You don't have to be 100% on top of it because the artist is deceased, the subject is deceased or too famous to be on the internet, like all of that kind of stuff, so you kind of know they're not going to see it. But I think at the portrait gallery, especially with their prizes, like the photographic portrait prize and the painting prize that they do, that subject and that artist is watching that post like a hawk. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, about being sort of that online mediator between the public and between the collection, because you're obligated to keep that collection safe, not physically, because that's like a whole other can of worms, but in that digital space, you are the security team, the alarms, you're the storage, like everything is up to you. And it's, it's a lot to put on someone, but at the same time, I'm like, it strokes my ego when I get to press the hide comment button and like, I am almighty powerful Georgie and I'm going to say no.
The role of a social media manager that nobody really sees. Sometimes you think, oh, you walk around posting Instagram reels, that must be fun. Or you get some really curated images, so that's an easy thing. Or you've got so many followers, so that must be really cool to get engagement. But you also told me that you're sometimes the custodian of your own well-being, which is tough in most instances when you get 100+ comments. But you're also supporting sometimes an emerging artist who that's the first time their piece of art, their life's creation was shared. And I think that's an important role that you're playing. Have you ever had the opportunity to have a conversation with an artist that's been targeted with lots of comments, and I'd love to know what some of that interaction was like.
I had an artist who I'd met at the opening of the exhibition, and she was very much online. It was one of the prizes. She was very online. Her artwork was shared in like a weird meme collage on some San Francisco influencer meme page that had like 5 million followers with no credit, no nothing. And she I think her go-to was she messaged them and then she was like, I don't know what to do. So she messaged us and she was like, there was that expectation that we would protect. And I was like, I will help you. You are my little artist baby and I will help you on the big bad internet. But it was just so interesting that was kind of her go-to. There have been other instances, though, where photographers in particular, have replied to comments on threads before I've gotten to them. And that's always it can always turn into like a huge problem, because if they're getting their work torn to shreds, they either just take it on the chin because that's who they are, or they do get quite frustrated.
Or very emotive.
And emotive, yeah. Like, I'm very lucky that most of them have been good interactions, and that the artists who do reply kind of have an understanding of the profile of the gallery, and that their replies are going out to 170,000 people, and that once they put it out there, they can't control where it goes. There have been some really, really lovely times where there was a portrait a couple years back by Kat Leedon, and it was a photographic portrait of them post double mastectomy. They were sitting in bed. It was a really dark portrait. They'd been crying. They had the scars. And I thought it was stunning from the moment I saw it. And in the comments, it was just this really special sort of exchange between women and people who'd been through the same experience, who had commented how empowered that made them feel and how brave the artist was. And that kind of thing is just like, it makes my heart swell. And it's like the moment when the kid walked into the Mint. It's like you facilitated that kind of healing conversation and you facilitated that really positive feedback. Whereas there have been other ones where people have just been saying the worst stuff, not thinking that even though I've tagged this artist, that the artist is going to see every single one of their comments. And there have been artists who have just bluntly gone, what you're saying is incorrect, and I don't understand why you're commenting. Like, do you think people aren't going to see what you're commenting? So it's really, sometimes you just have literally no control over what happens in your comment section. And that kind of hurts me as a control freak. But when it leads to really nice exchanges, like in the Kat Leedon post, like, it makes the bad things, it weighs out the bad. So, I don't know, it's interesting.
There's more good than bad.
Hopefully sometimes.
Yes.
At the minute, more bad than good, but that's okay.
Yes. Moving into galleries and museums being sometimes not fast-paced, intentionally mellow, the right tone, the right mood, the right setting, the right amount of negative space or empty space so the portrait can shine, the piece of artwork can shine. How do you now take this and translate it into our current social media, Instagram, TikTok? I've got 3 seconds to learn about anything in life. How do you translate these pieces of art, these experiences that engage with the audience, but also give your artist, the creator, some value and recognition?
Yeah, this is a very good question. I think finding the in is something that I spend a lot of time doing. Finding what's going to be engaging in that 3 seconds is really important. And whether that's the design of the exhibition or the space, whether that's a famous work or a famous face, whether that's the prize, right? So working at the portrait gallery, we did a thing called the People's Portrait, which was we gave the public 25 Australians and they had to choose who we were going to commission as our next portrait. The commissioning process of a portrait is very long and very boring. It takes a very long time for it to actually come to fruition, especially if it's a painting, especially if you have multiple people in the same image or work. But trying to get people to vote when we'd never run it before, when the platform wasn't huge, and when these people weren't necessarily Australia's like number one go-tos, because we were trying to make it so that there wasn't just a straight white male in there at all. I think the only straight white males were like 3 of the original Wiggles, and the rest were like women, people of colour, First Nations people, people who represented professions that you couldn't see in the collection. And so some of them, like at least half, were like, they're obviously not going to get chosen. But trying to find a way to get people to vote for that sort of taught me a lot. We made a whole reel that was focused on the fact that if you voted, you went in the running to win a $2,000 ticket, like a gift card to some airline, which I would 100% as a consumer be all like, okay, I'm going to go vote for the Wiggles, because that's kind of like my in. And I think with a lot of exhibitions there, it was finding that one thing that's going to shine in the first 3 seconds and then have the rest kind of draw you in slowly through the rest of that content. So, for example, with the Joan Ross exhibition, the thing that was huge about that was the colour. She uses this weird neon yellow, which is all about, like, it's like high-vis. It's all about this emergence of high-vis post 9/11 and how you can do anything if you're wearing a high-vis vest. And so it was utilising that kind of pop of colour, which is how they also drew people into the exhibition, that allowed me to craft a reel that then showcased the rest of the space. I think the other thing as well is finding a way to tell stories in that, because, you know, you're working at a contemporary cultural institution. They may get people in who, especially in Australia, if you're not showing Botticelli, if you're not showing Cartier, I have nothing against the National Gallery of Australia, it's fine. If you're going to whip out something like the Ouroboros, right? Lindy Lee is an Australian artist. She's well known overseas, but kind of only in art circles. If you ask someone on the street who Lindy Lee is, they wouldn't know, right? It's kind of finding so the Ouroboros, the thing that is interesting about that is it at night. And so it's finding that one key thing, I think, that kind of lets you make that fast-paced content. With the Carol Jerams exhibition at the Portrait Gallery, Carol Jerams, prolific photographer, only had a 10-year career because she died at 30. And her portraits are like part of the photographic art historical canon in Australia. But if you ask random man on the street, who's Carol Jerams, he's going to have no idea. So what I did with the reel for that one was I told her story, and I told it with her ages. So I said she had her first exhibition at this age. She published a book at this age. She was the biggest photographer in the country at this age, and she died at 30. So it kind of had that pacing that I think you want in your online content. And then I think it worked. It engaged people. It got very high views. We did put money on it, but it did get very high views. But I think that's because people were drawn in by that story. And if you don't kind of have that storytelling, that narrative, especially at museums and galleries, you kind of, you're trying to, it's Sisyphus and the boulder up the hill. You're trying to get people to care about something that they know nothing about. That's like I was saying right at the beginning, when kids go to galleries, you need to pick that one thing that they want to see and that they want to find, like the penguins at the zoo. It's the same, I think, with reels. You have to find the thing that most people are going to find the most interesting. And it's a shame because we can't actually do TikTok because I work for the government and how they feel about TikTok.
We've been told that they don't like TikTok.
They don't like TikTok. And the other thing is the kind of bureaucracy of working in government as well, is that you have to get all these layers of approvals. And so if there's a trend, by the time you've actually got an approval to do the trend, and then edit the trend and send that up the line, trend's over. So it's trying to find stuff that has a longer lifespan than a lot of the stuff on TikTok and Instagram Reels kind of have at the minute. And because I'm guilty of coming across a natural history museum in the UK who's doing a TikTok trend that's 2 months old and laughing at it, because I'm like, you're so late. Why did you still post it? But then I catch myself as a actual gallery museum worker as well, and I'm like, how dare you be mean to that museum worker? They're trying their best.
Their brief didn't get approved.
No.
The executive needed a couple of extra days to read it, and by that time the trend was over, but that was not mentioned as a risk in the brief.
Yep.
So,
and I think it's that sort of, you're trying to keep up with the times, but everything's so slow that you can't. So it's trying to find things that are actually going to last for months and that don't just pick on this one viral thing. Because, we can't use trending sounds. We can't use trending audio. We can't use CapCut and use all the green screeny things. I get very jealous working in my current job of the Greens posting all these memes like that. And I'm like, I wish I could do that. And they can't, because they're not government per se. They're not under the same sort of Commonwealth guidelines. They can do what they want. Sometimes I just want to make a meme about Sarah Hanson-Young having a salmon in Senate. That would be great. It's challenging. And yeah, it is kind of remembering that people have the attention span of a flea. But I think as well, I spend hours every day scrolling TikTok. So I try to make content that would engage me and that would engage my ADHD partner and that kind of would engage my mum still. It's kind of putting yourself in the shoes of your audience and working out what it is about that exhibition that would get someone who doesn't go to galleries through the doors.
Yeah. And I think that challenge is also what brings out the best in you as a storyteller,
Oh,
because
yeah.
you've just got so many challenges and barriers out there that you've got to now not just do it and post. You've got to think about, okay, so how long is this going to take in an approval process? How do I engage? How do I jump on board this trend, and what do I do with it? I think that brings out the best in you as a storyteller. But speaking of telling stories, galleries and museums are most of the time brick and mortar establishments. How have you seen, in the time that you've spent at galleries and museums, how have you seen them evolving into being more accessible, more, embrace more diversity and inclusivity? How have you seen that change happening?
I think sort of my entry into accessibility and inclusion was at the Mint. They had a little Braille kit that they used when there were students that came in with visual impairments. And it was very outdated. It was also just slightly strange in its creation, and the focus wasn't on, like, they didn't actually have any coins in this Braille kit, and it's like, what do you mean? You don't have coins in the Braille kit? Like, that's what we do. So it was, I got to rewrite that, and I think one of the things that maybe radicalized me more than anything was the way that this Braille version of the tour was written. It was written for like a 4-year-old reading a picture book. It was very, very, I don't want to say dumbed down, but it was very simple language that a 12-year-old would have been far better at, and I presented my tour to 12-year-olds every day, and they understood it. And part of me was like, okay, but we can't infantilize someone who reads with Braille because they are the same age. They just have a vision impairment. So being able to rewrite that, recreate the objects that went with it, was actually really satisfying to me, knowing that if even once a year some kid with a visual impairment came through, but they got to touch and they got to feel what all the other kids were seeing, that was really special. Again, it's that like one validation thing, like the kid watching the YouTube videos and coming in. And I think that's what's kind of missing in the accessibility space, that kind of real push for we need to do it for that one person that's going to need it, because everywhere else in the world, they're probably feeling left out. And it would be so special to come into a museum in particular, a place that is predominantly a very visual space, and feel included. I went to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, and they have a tactile version of their sunflowers. Oh my God. Even me, I want to touch Van Gogh paintings all the time, and I can see them.
You're very dangerous to have at a gallery.
I so am. Let me tell you, Parliament House. There is a James Gleeson work just outside my office. There are no barriers. There are no break beams. I could walk up to that and touch it. I would get in so much trouble because there are cameras. But the temptation every day to touch that tactile, like, looking paint. Whew, whew. So, like, for me, as someone who just wants to touch everything, just to feel what it's like, having that kind of sensory experience, for me, sort of makes my experience better. And so it's not just for people with, sensory impairments. It's not just for people with disability. It's for everyone. Everyone can benefit from things like a tactile version of the sunflowers. It means that someone with a visual impairment can see it for the first time, but it also means that children are going to behave better because there's something they can touch. You know, it's that kind of knowing that it would benefit more than just people who need it is something that people in, I think, the GLAM sector don't necessarily understand. And I also think, you know, it doesn't, sure, it might cost a lot, but it does, like the gain that you would make knowing that you are in an institution that is accessible, that is welcoming to people with visual impairments, who are deaf or hard of hearing, who, you know, even people who need low sensory environments. There are so many museums now that are doing quiet mornings. And that's so good, you know, it's great. But I think we're getting a lot better at providing accessible options for neurodiverse people. But I think we still have a long ways to go when it comes to other forms of disability, when it comes to visual impairment, all of that sort of stuff. But at the same time, you know, we're also very inaccessible if you don't speak English. That's another big thing. When I worked at the Mint, because I lived in China for a year, I did 10 years of Mandarin. When we had, before COVID, the huge Chinese tour groups would walk in. If I heard one of them speaking Mandarin, I would ask them if they wanted a map in Mandarin. And when I tell you that I made these 70 people's days by asking them if they wanted a map, like, I mean, it's a white girl speaking Mandarin, so they were probably like, hell yeah. But also, you know, this is probably the first time today they've walked into a space and actually been offered a map in Mandarin. And I think that's, like, I think one of your questions is if I had unlimited money.
Correct.
And I could change one thing about the museum sector, I would invent a Babel fish from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and I would give multiple to every single museum. And I just want it to be this like magical thing where everything changes into the language you need it to be. It can simplify the language. It can change the language. I was telling my partner about this morning, and he was like, you know, that's like one thing that AI would probably be good for, is removing those barriers, those language barriers. And I was like, you know what? I don't mind if it kills the environment, if it manages I do mind. But, you know, it's that kind of thing where we're using AI to do all these weird other things instead of stuff that actually helps people in the most straightforward way. And I think as well, you know, I spend a lot of time in my jobs explaining things to people that are not intuitive to a lot of people and are not understood. They're not accessible. Especially in my current role, I work for the Department of the House of Reps. And understanding politics is so difficult. Understanding like the Westminster system of government that is so old and has also been brought over by the British. We do some stuff that like, I don't even think the people in government know why we do it. But kind of being able to understand what it is that you're doing when you are, you know, partaking in democratic processes like voting, what above the line voting, what below the line voting means, what voting for the Senate versus the House of Reps means. Like, I just feel such a strong urge to make sure that people from everywhere understand that. My nail lady, I love her. She's 22. She lives in Gungahlin. She has like this home salon, but she asked me, because I was talking about my job, she was like, what's the difference between democracy and communism? And I was like, girl, let me tell you in a way that you will understand. And it just brings me so much joy to like actually educate people. And, you know, when it comes to coins, that's what brought me joy. People understanding why money exists, especially people who are 12-year-old children who have probably never seen a $5 note. Maybe they have, but, you know, like, that's not their norm. But they need to be able to understand how that led to their norm. And I think that's the thing with, like, art as well. I was told once by a colleague from Taiwan that he would read stuff on our website and he'd be all like, I literally don't understand what this portrait is about. Then he'd see it on socials and he'd see the tiny tweaks that I had made to that art description. And he'd be all like, oh, I get it. And it's that kind of thing that I think is so important to make sure that the broadest amount of people can understand stuff.
And that's your superpower, Georgie. The ability to take complex, sometimes unnecessarily complicated things and speak about them to anyone you're with in a way that they can understand, engage, and possibly even start being curious about it. I think that's what you do really well, and that's what I've heard right throughout this conversation. I'm going to springboard a little bit into democracy because it's something we're all meant to value and apparently love. I want to ensure that we understand Australian democracy. I'm a migrant too. I don't know that I had the full extent of knowledge of, yes, you can go to the parliament. Yes, you can park at the basement of the parliament. I'm unsure how safe that is. You can walk around, you can see the Lego exhibitions, you can get a tour on how many clocks are there at the Parliament House. The food service is amazing, love their high tea, but I'm not really sure I understand the Senate, the House of Reps. Can you break this down so that all of us can understand a little better? And then when we go to the polls one day, we know what we're doing with that little box and that pencil and the democracy sausage. Thank you.
First of all, I do not speak for the Department of the House of Representatives, nor do I speak for the Australian Electoral Commission. But when you go to the polls, you are choosing who represents you for the next 3 years. There are two houses in Parliament. There's the House of Representatives, which is also called the People's House. These are your elected officials, and they are kind of our first point of call. Bills will go through the House up to the Senate and then come back to the House to be made into laws. For example, the social media ban for under 16s. That was introduced to the House of Representatives by the Labor Party. They go through a whole process in the House where they debate, they have long-winded discussions about the merits, the disadvantages, all of that sort of stuff for the bill. Because we are in a party-based system, a lot of the time it's one party is for, the other party is against, and then we have a lot of minor parties and independents as well. It's interesting. I think people have a really big misconception of what actually happens in Parliament because all they do is watch Question Time. Question Time is probably the most, I don't want to say unhinged, but it's the most unhinged part of the parliamentary sitting day, because that's the hour where they can just throw questions at each other. And it can be quite aggressive. It can get very preachy. But the actual workings of Parliament are quite different to what you see at Question Time. Usually there are not that many people in the House. They're all off doing other things. Like they're working on committees. They're working on things that are important to their electorate. So when you vote for someone in the House of Representatives, that is the person who is representing you. You are not sitting there if you are in Canberra and you're not ticking the box that says, I want to vote Anthony Albanese to be Prime Minister, or you're not ticking a box that says, I want Peter Dutton to be Prime Minister. That's what happens in the States. We don't work like that. What we work with is all the different seats. We're losing a couple this election cycle because they've merged some, but it's over 150 different electorates in Australia, and the land is divided up by population. So Sydney has a whole lot more electorates than Canberra does, because Sydney, bigger, more people. Canberra, I think we've got 3. So when you get to the election, you get a small form. Your small form is your House of Reps form. It's usually green. And on that form, there are all the different candidates for all the different parties, and you number them in the order that you would preference them. What's really important before you get to the polls is to understand what all these different people's policies are. I think this election in particular will mean that more people will actually go out and look at what different parties stand for, because of the potential massive repercussions in places like Canberra when it comes to some parties' policies. So the best way to work out what people you kind of align with is there's the ABC Vote Compass. I know where I sit, but I do the Vote Compass every single year just in case it's thrown me a curveball. It asks you how you feel about things like nuclear power in Australia, about how much we spend on defence, about how we feel about migration and immigration, about how we feel about climate change. It asks you all these questions, and then it puts you on a map of where you best sit in terms of being progressive or conservative. And it also shows you where the different parties sit. So that's your little piece of paper. This election, because the ACT only has senators for 3 years rather than 6 years, some of the a lot of the states have senators for 6 years. The ACT, I think because we're a territory and we're quite small, we only have them for 3 years. That's your really big piece of paper, because more people, I think, run for the Senate. You can either vote above the line, and I think you're choosing parties, or you vote below the line and you choose people. Genuinely, your best bet to actually make sure that you are using your democratic vote in the way that you need to, and the way that kind of you're expected to, is by working out whose policies you align with. And if you are on that vote compass and you're bang on with the Australian Labor Party, on the day of voting, if you see someone in a red shirt, you can take one of their pamphlets and that will tell you who to vote for, if those are the policies that you feel most strongly about. I think the exciting thing about Australian politics at the minute is the fact that we have so many independent candidates running. People like David Pocock in the ACT, he is very Canberra focused, and he kind of, I think he advocates really strongly for Canberra, but again, because he's not aligned to any of the major parties, his policies are not as publicised, so it requires you to do a little bit more research. But I think that's where voting above the line can sometimes be easier, because you don't have to have such a thorough understanding of candidates. But a lot of people think they're really cool when they vote below the line. I've never voted below the line. Because prior to getting my job 2 months ago, I had no understanding of any of this. And I didn't actually understand how important it was that we actually learn about policy and that we actually learn about who we're voting into Parliament. Because when I say that the House is the people's house, like, the monarch literally is not allowed into the House of Representatives. He cannot come in. The Governor General is not allowed into the House of Representatives. Like, it is where the core of our democracy happens, and then we send it up to the senators to kind of look at it, and then they send it back if they have anything they want to change. The numbers are quite different as well. There's like your 150 plus in the House. There's about a third of that in the Senate. We don't have as many senators as we do people in the House, and that means that their opinions are for wider groups of people. They're bigger. So I don't know, it's just so important that you actually understand what you're putting down. Like my nail lady, she was like, usually I just go in and number the boxes. I don't pay attention. And I'm like, okay, but do you care about women's reproductive rights? She was like, yeah, of course I do. I'm like, then you need to actually pay attention, because your vote matters, and what you put on that piece of paper will dictate how the country is run for the next 3 years. And, you know, looking abroad, you can see how many things can be overturned by a change in government. And I think people just don't really get that. And because we're not necessarily taught the ins and outs of how our democratic system works. We go to Parliament, we park underneath the building, we go inside, we look at them do their things on the floor during question time. But apart from that, like, there's no actual understanding of why you were doing the things that you were doing. And, like, you know, you were saying the citizenship test. They ask you the colour of the flag. Anyone knows the colour of the flag, you know, but you don't actually understand how, you know, I was born into this democratic system. As soon as I turned 18, I'd have to vote, right? But, like, even I'm not told how or what it is I'm voting for. And you don't really see how that affects people until it affects you.
Correct. And I think there is stigma around leading up to an election, but can we talk about it? What's the right thing to say? Will somebody take my ability to talk about what's the democratic process as prescription of how to vote? No, that's not the reason we're talking about it. We want to say that there are different layers to this. You need to understand it, where you need to look, what information you need to get. But even mainstream media, all I've seen in the last little while is someone's Dululu and someone has a Salulu. And I'm like, oh, that's really nice, but tell me about the construct of this. It's really nice to make party, policy, and politics really fun and out there and catchphrases, and you can remember these things. That's good. Sometimes we need to be reminded of why we're doing something. And I think that's what I wanted to get to. And thank you for giving us that co-understanding of, you know, this is what it all looks like. And this is why we need to vote and be proud to be part of a democracy. There's some wonderful things about a democracy. Let's be proud, but let's be proud with the understanding. I think lack of one may not keep you in balance.
Yeah.
Working at the House of Reps, what was that 1 or 2 or 3 surprising facts you learned at orientation or at your role now that you think lots of people may not know?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think I didn't know a lot of things. I've always, because I'm like, I come from an arts background, and I have not necessarily been very politically engaged outside of once every 3 years going to an election party and having all the grammar boys that I'm friends with yell at each other about who's getting what seat and what that means, and they know the TV presenter by name, and I'm just like, oh, okay, that's nice, I'm gonna drink my beer. But like,
There's lots of art in Parliament. They have very colourful descriptions of each other.
Yes.
Very vivid imagination
Yes.
sometimes. Right?
I think what I didn't realise was the amount of... It's very scripted, almost. I think that's what struck me. There is so much procedure and practice that is written down and that they have to abide by in the chamber that it's actually like mind-blowing, the things that they have to say to introduce a bill, the things that they have to say to be able to debate a bill, the fact that they only have 1 hour to ask questions every day, the fact that they, a lot of the times, work a 3 or 4 day week, but they work huge extended hours. Nobody told me about the bells. So
What's the bells?
Oh, yeah, very good question. So the bells so all the clocks in Parliament House, they're not actual like clocks with batteries, because they all have to be at the exact same time. They're all hooked up electronically to this central system. And the central system also rings the bells. And what happens when they ring the bells is they're calling politicians to the chambers.
It's like school.
Yeah, it's like school. Like on a Tuesday, if they're starting at 10, 5 minutes before, all the bells start ringing. And there are lights on the clocks. On the left is the Senate's red light, and on the right is the House's green light, and they flash. In the bathrooms, there are random things up on the ceiling that look like fire extinguisher thingies, and they flash the colour to tell people, the politicians, that they need to go to the chamber. So they ring before divisions. If they have to vote on something in the House, the bells will go for either 5 minutes or a minute. And when I tell you that noise-cancelling headphones do not hide the sound of the bells, I learnt that the hard way, and I am $400 poorer because I was like, surely, no, not that frequency. So that sort of thing, like it's actually a really like odd place to work because there are so many rules. A lot of the rules they come from that English Westminster version of Parliament, so they seem quite outdated sometimes. But it's like there are so many fascinating stories about how those sort of weird, quirky rules kind of create this weird history. Like I think next week is the 90th anniversary of the sitting with the most number of divisions in the one period. It was something like 83 divisions. They sat from 11 a.m. to 5:20 a.m. the next day. And they did 83 divisions. For reference, the next highest number of divisions was 33 in November of like 2011. So like it's weird stories like that I'm immediately like, ooh, because it's like amidst all that procedure, obviously there was something happening that they really needed to get across the line, and they made them sit for like 18 hours to do that, and they were expected back at 12 o'clock the next day. Like it's those kind of weird, quirky things that I had no idea about that now I'm like, I need to tell everyone about this because it was just so weird.
Yeah, because I'm sitting there very enthusiastic, hypothetically, to listen to the member from Wentworth speaking. Yeah. But the member from Wentworth has gone to get his late slip. Because, you know, the alarm went on and the red bell was flashing, but he had to do what he had to do before the member from Wentworth came in. If it was a he or a she or someone like that, I don't know who the member from Wentworth is. But do politicians, first-time politicians that get into the House of Reps, for example, do they get an orientation?
Yes.
They do?
Yes, they do. They do. I think they're organising that now for after the election. They do get an orientation because I've been told it's actually quite confronting the amount of information that they need to know. Like, it's not just... It's kind of like maths, right? You go in and you're like,
Oh,
I
that's
know
simple.
numbers. Yeah, right? It's like, oh, I know numbers. Like, I can make this work. But the equations, like the concepts, all this, like, the rules that you kind of have to learn in order to function in a way that benefits your electorate inside the House is wild. It's like they have to learn so much so quickly before that first sitting week of the new parliament. And I mean, part of me is like, I would never want to be a politician, but I'm learning all that stuff anyway. So I probably one day, no. I think it's so interesting the way that they sort of enter parliament and their entire kind of conception of politics would change, because it is a lot of rules and it's a lot of procedure, and the procedure is written in such a way that if you change one word, it could be something entirely different, which is difficult for me because I often want to change one word to make it more understandable, but then I make that sentence mean something entirely different. So it's a lot of working with people who are very close to the procedure to work out ways to make it palatable to your not politically inclined audience, while still retaining the meaning.
There are lots of roles, defined roles with long names sometimes in the House of Reps. What's one of the names that you were not expecting? Because there's a president of something and...
Well, there's a president of the Senate. There's the clerk of the House. That's actually spelt clerk.
Right.
But they're the clerk. They like sit up the front, kind of in front of the speaker, and they read the bills. They're like the admin people. But they still wear their fun little gowns, which I think is so strange. I'm like, why are they wearing their fun little gowns? There's the sergeant-at-arms.
Who carries arms?
Who carries the mace.
Right.
Which we still carry all the way into Parliament every time they sit. And they put it down. And it's again this weird piece of tradition. That
Ceremonial?
Yes. It's like a ceremonial mace. And there are these dispatch boxes that if you notice people speaking in the House, there's this weird like chest in front of them sometimes. That's probably where they put their papers most of the time. That used to be the box that they sent to and from the Senate. It would pass messages. But now, because they can do it all electronically, it's kind of just there as decoration because it belongs in the chamber. And they also used to have hourglasses before they had the bells.
Right.
That said, I'm sure someone was just like ringing a cowbell rather than the electric bell. But like they have the hourglasses that marks the time. It's just such random stuff.
Something you may not know, in Sri Lanka, when the members of the opposition don't agree with the members of the current government proposals, they have resorted to carrying the mace and running away from Parliament.
See,
that will stop the proceedings of Parliament. It's hilarious. And I don't think that's how democracy is meant to function, but some of these ceremonial artifacts need to be used carefully.
But yeah, we put so much on these like outdated ceremonial things that, you know, you can take advantage of that sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like the dress code. Apparently you can still wear safari suits in the House of Representatives, which was like this huge thing in the 70s. And it's still in the rules. But I don't know if anybody would ever actually turn up in a safari suit.
Would be a nice picture.
I mean, yeah. But it's the whole thing about, like, you know, in the ACT Legislative Assembly last year, someone got in trouble for not wearing a tie. It's that kind of, like, you know, we're very, you know, we're proper. But then you've got people from all walks of life actually being members and going in there, and, you know, some of them are ex-farmers, some of them are 28, you know, some of them don't kind of have that concept of tradition. And I think it's just, I don't know, it's really interesting. It's a really strange but interesting place to work. The
sure
characters.
I'm sure it is.
And I don't even mean the politicians.
In your current diverse roles of storytelling, where you have to tell lots of engaging stories, but also be conscious about what's the right thing to say, what's the right timing, and how do you best portray your subject in the best light, how has your background in film, arts, experience in the GLAM sector helped you?
So I started, when I left high school, I went to film school for 2 years in Sydney. And that was mildly traumatic, mostly because it's really not an industry for 18-year-old women, especially straight out of school. I think more than anything else, that kind of taught me resilience, but it also taught me how to speak to people. There's something really strange about being on a set with 6 of your fellow students as director, and you are in charge and telling people what to do, when last week somebody else was director and they were telling you what to do. It's also very strange having to work with actors who are not being paid because it's a student film. I think film school, it just taught me how to speak to people and how to get on their level and how to speak to people in a way that would get me what I wanted from them. Not in a weird way, but, you know, like how to get a good performance, how to get a message across, how to pivot when something wasn't working in a really tight time frame. I also think what it helped me with was sort of that level of self-confidence that you kind of need in the GLAM sector. The GLAM sector can be unforgiving. You have to go out on a limb, I think, a lot of the time in order to get to where you want. I managed to get into the Mint because I knew someone and they needed tour guides. So I did a small half interview and got the job based on charisma. And I think that film school background really did help. The other way it's helped is with video creation. A lot of the time, people learn I went to film school and think that I'm this, you know, master auteur who knows how to do camera and sound and light. They think I'm you. I'm not you. I'm always like, I went to learn how to screenwrite and produce and direct. I don't know how to use a camera.
I pretend most of the time.
It's a bit like that, right?
Yeah.
It's like you kind of know what things should look like, and you're like, I'm just going to play with it till it looks right. And so they kind of just assume that I know all these things, and I am a very big fan of the fake it till you make it sort of, you know, method. And so I will film things if I have to film things. Not very good at it, but I can make it look good. Like I think that's, again, something else I learned from film school. You're making student films. Things are going to go very wrong. So you learn how to make the best out of your really bad footage or your really bad sound. And you kind of work with what you have. And that's also really helpful in the GLAM sector because the GLAM sector doesn't have a lot of money. So it's working with your very small team or just by yourself. And it's learning how to ask things of other people that would help you. I think it's asking for help as well. And knowing that the GLAM sector is so small as well that you have to be personable And you have to be really open to sharing and to helping, because not only is it going to help someone else, it'll help you in the long run, because word spreads. And if you are, you know, a nice person who helps people out, that's going to help you 2-3 jobs down the line. And I think that's again, the film industry is the same. And, you know, like I went to uni after film school and I did an art history degree, art history and curatorship. And I very quickly realised that curatorship kind of wasn't for me because it wasn't hands-on enough. It wasn't helping people in the way that I wanted to kind of facilitate an experience, whether it be art, museum, understanding Parliament. So I think my background really kind of pushed me in the direction of social media, and in the direction of kind of like broadcast storytelling, I guess. I'm half doing a master's in teaching and that's honestly, even I did 1 semester, and that has been so useful in understanding how people's brains work and understanding, like, you know, your psychosocial stages of development. Like, it's high school psychology, but understanding people and understanding how to teach them has really affected my work, and it's really made, it's put on paper what I've like always kind of innately felt is important about storytelling. It's like, okay, but this is why. Like, there are reasons that people do all of this sort of stuff. So, like, I'm still learning. My background, very relevant. It helps with my job. I'm like one of the only people from our cohort at film school that actually still does film. Not in the way that you'd think of as a film student, but I guarantee I have more views than anyone else. And that's because I put money on my reels. But, you know, it's like that sort of thing. And I'm still learning. And one day I think I'll get to the place where I want to, whether it's in this industry or if it's teaching, yelling at school kids about the holy dollar. You know, it's that kind of always learning approach that I think is what gets you places in the GLAM sector.
And it's that resilience also that you spoke about, and that's something else I'd love to learn from you about. You mentioned going to film school as a 18-year-old out of school female that's going to face challenges. I don't think they stop at film school.
Oh, no.
They'll continue on society's getting a lot better, we say. I'm a father of 2 young girls, so I'm watching closely. How do you overcome some of those challenges that you face when you start your career, when you move through your career? Because those challenges are real. But those challenges, you're smart enough to know, are not going to hold you back from what you want to achieve or where you want to go. How do you manage some of those challenging situations and also make sure that you're present for your partner, for your mum, for the people that care for you, and you're being your best self?
I feel like my answer's not going to be where you want it to be. It's not inspiring. Like, I think...
Could be a gin and tonic.
Well, yes. I think the reason I moved from the portrait gallery to the House of Reps is because my dad was really sick. And I cared so much about my work at the portrait gallery that it was becoming really unsustainable because I was just like all cared out. And I was trying so hard to actually, care for my dad, but also care for 170,000 people, right? It was like so much, and I was like really wearing myself thin. And I think a lot of people do that in the GLAM sector because we are so passionate. Nobody gets into the GLAM area for money. It is not a well-paid field. You could be getting so much more money doing it privately somewhere else, you know? But I think having so much passion can be kind of detrimental at times. So I moved to the House of Reps because I know that my passion kind of lies with art, with actual artifacts, with objects. But the House of Reps, I'm not saying that I'm lazy at my job at the House of Reps. What I'm saying is that it's more I'm learning as the audience is learning, rather than I have all this knowledge and I want to get it out, and if it doesn't come across well, I'm going to get really, really sad about it, and it's going to impact my work life and then my home life. Whereas I think doing the House of Reps thing, I'm starting with a not as engaged audience. The audiences are very, very different. On Twitter, for X, for example, they're all very politically engaged, and they're there for live tweeting of what's happening in the chamber. I don't actually have to worry about that. Someone else actually does all the Twitter stuff. We didn't have an Instagram before I started. So I'm not trying to uphold this, like, what people understand to be. It's not reputational. Like, I don't have the weight of this organization's reputation on my shoulders. And I think that's like this huge thing that people don't talk about in the GLAM sector, and why a lot of people do leave, because it's unsustainable being that enthusiastic about something all the time. And I will go back eventually. I keep telling the portrait gallery, like, I'm just going to go learn something for 2 years and then I'll come back. But, like, it's putting yourself in a situation where you can actually learn and try new things that you wouldn't really get to do in a place where you were comfortable. Like, at the portrait gallery, I was very comfortable with the collection, with the art, with how to talk about art. I have no idea what I'm doing talking about politics, but I'm learning, and it's really nice to go to work 9 to 5, learn for 8 hours, produce some content, teach some other people, but I don't have that whole big reputational risk on my shoulders because, like, I don't know, I think taking a breath is really beneficial, whether that's you going on holiday, you taking a year off to do something else, you being able to commit 100% to something in the GLAM sector means 200%. And I think, I don't know, it's the burnout is real. And I think the best thing that I've done for myself is actually go, okay, hang on. There's so much going on. I need to I'll get to a point in like 2 months where I care so much about politics that it's like insane and I'll be intolerable. But I think it's like trying to, I don't know. I've had a lot of people who've moved from the GLAM sector to somewhere else because of that kind of emotional burnout, because you care so much. And they're like, you know what, it's kind of nice just to sit back for even a little while and go, huh. And then you start to miss things. You're like, oh, I missed that particular part of my job. And so, you know, you're still attached to that GLAM sector, but you're learning to be better in like your self-care, your self-management, understanding, you know, your worth, and that your worth is not really in a workplace attached to your knowledge. It's attached to, you know, what you produce. And I don't know, I feel like I went off on a huge tangent, and I'm so sorry, but like...
No, but you did tell me clearly
yeah,
that distance sometimes can help you
yeah,
reignite the passion.
Yeah.
And sometimes taking a decision to distance yourself from something you really love is difficult.
Yeah.
But you've had the smarts to do that.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Not therapy, because I don't go to that. I think it probably just comes from, I intellectualize a lot of things, like the racist comments. I'm like, okay, I can see why all of this is happening. I can understand where this person, like, you know, you understand sort of what's led them to this spot. And when you apply that to yourself and you're like, okay, what has left me to this really intense glam burnout? It's the caring. It's the care factor. For me in particular, it's how much I love something and how much passion I have for it. Sometimes I just need to take a step back and be all like, okay, we can't be passionate about 4 different things. You know, we have to be passionate about just a couple things at a time. And like at the minute, like my dad passed away, so I still love him dearly, and he lives on my shelf, his ashes with his little cap on them. TMI, but that's what you're gonna get. Like he was taking up so much of my, you know, care factor that him going has kind of made me be all like, oh, well, there's now, like, because I'm not like all consumed by work, all consumed by my personal life. I have that kind of gap again. And so I'm going to restart my masters. And I have that sort of emotional space for that now. And I wouldn't have that if I was working at the portrait gallery, because all of that emotional stuff would just be dumped onto work because it is already an emotional space. I think it's just knowing and understanding as I've gotten older myself and how my body kind of reacts to things. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's not rocket science. I'm not saving lives. And I think being in a hospital, like full-time for a year, has also kind of helped as well, because you're sitting there and you're like, I know what I do is very important, but I'm not literally saving someone's life. I'm making it better. And to make somebody else's life better, I need to look after myself. And I think that's kind of the big thing about, you know, the glam sector, about moving through the glam sector. The most well-adjusted people are the ones who know when to take a step back and go, okay, look, we've done some really hard stuff. Maybe we just do something really simple for a bit, recalibrate, and then we'll do more wild stuff. It's like, I think at the Portrait Gallery every year when they did the Photographic Portrait Prize, that was everybody's time to breathe, because they'd done it for 17 years. Everybody kind of knew how it worked, and it was that time to like emotionally detach. Meanwhile, I was arguing with racists in the comments, but you know, it's that knowing when to chill. And that's why I think the arts should have more money, so that people can go on holidays more often, so that they can chill. I think it just comes from learning and growing up and realizing that, again, no matter how much passion I have for it, I am not saving someone's life.
Where does, and I'm very keen, and that's why I keep asking this a couple of times, that ability for you at a very young age to process the weight of an organization on your shoulders as a social media manager, yes. The passion for the glam sector, yes. But sometimes you've also got to deal with our friends in the racist comments section. That takes effort. That takes an emotional toll. Where does that come from, Georgie? Where does the ability to look through a comment, understand where that person's probably coming from, understand that, you know, they may not have been thinking when they wrote what they wrote, and the ability to move and detach yourself from that? Where does that come from?
Who knows? Probably just being a person in the world. I think a lot of us have to detach like that. You know, I was the only white kid at school, and I was like 4 times bigger than any other child there. So I think I've spent a lot of my life dodging comments and like as a woman, young woman in the film industry, you spend a lot of time dodging comments. And it's kind of like building up that kind of resilience to other people. And I think as well, acknowledging that I am very well educated, that I am quite privileged to have been educated in the way that I have been, and I'm quite worldly, and I, have the privilege of working for the government, so I kind of have a stable job, that sort of thing. And understanding where other people are coming from. And, if I was brought up in any other circumstance, I might be like that as well. And there are still some times where I'll say something and I'll be like, hold up. Why did that just come out of your mouth? And I'll be all like, it's checking your privilege. And it's checking, like, am I angry at this because it's actually a problem? Or am I angry at this because, like you were saying, it's people don't take that 2 seconds to actually go, is this actually a problem? And why do I care? It's that kind of, I don't know where it comes from. I think I'm an eldest daughter. It's probably that as well. Look out for your eldest daughter.
Will do. I've always enjoyed your storytelling. I've learned so much from you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for also illuminating the world of democracy for me. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to us catching up again, doing a walk around any gallery, any museum. You're the person to do this walk around with. Georgie, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this so much.
Thank you, Evan, for your time and for asking such wonderful questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A massive thank you to Crown Plaza Canberra for hosting this episode of the podcast. If you are looking for really nice accommodation in close proximity to Canberra CBD, or if you want well-appointed meeting spaces, check out Crown Plaza Canberra. Thank you again.